Hey everyone, it's Miss Solomon here, and today we're going to learn about the epic poem. To exemplify, I'll reference pop culture and anchor any concepts in our reading assignment for this week, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first epic poem of Western civilization, which also just so happens to be the first great story ever told about friendship, loss, and the search for meaning. This video series is organized in three parts. We will review key terminology related to the epic poem, which will allow us to better understand its narrative structure, and to end, we'll bring it all together and tie it to your lived experience. First, let's familiarize ourselves with the several vocabulary words related to the epic poem and conceptualize frameworks necessary to recognize and analyze one. First is the epic poem itself, which is a long narrative work, often thousands of lines, that tells the story of a hero whose deeds shape the fate of a nation, a people, or even the world. These stories are larger than life and showcase wars that decide civilizations, journeys across unknown lands, battles with monsters, and conversations with gods. In a broader and more traditional sense, an epic is grandiose, and while its definition and structure will be revised across time, each epic poem is deeply rooted in the culture it comes from to effectively articulate a universal message. That's why we can read the Epic of Gilgamesh today and still get something out of it. Second, an epic hero is the central heroic figure of an epic poem. This character is usually of noble or royal birth and possesses exceptional qualities. In the earliest years of the epic, the noble birth will hold true, but eventually evolve or dissolve. And heroes' exceptional qualities can range from things like physical prowess, intellectual agility, or some other attribute that makes them distinctly more powerful than the rest. The most important quality of an epic hero is his hamartia, which translates from the Greek to flaw. No matter how strong or smart the epic hero may be, they have a vulnerability. Most of the time, this vulnerability won't necessarily be tangible. More likely, the flaw will be conceptual and related to the character and their identity in some way. It's very important to understand that a hero's hamartia is complex. This flaw will be the hero's greatest strength, but it will also be the reason why they fail. Nonetheless, epic heroes will be afforded the opportunity in an epic poem or story to learn from their failure and correct their flaw. To give you a frame of reference, let's look at a couple of recognizable heroes from popular culture. First, T'Challa from Black Panther fits the mold of an epic hero in the most ancient way. He is of noble birth and elevated status, and he possesses superhuman qualities through the heart-shaped herb. His hamartia, though, is his initial over-reliance on the traditional worldview he inherited. While at first it was his strength, it becomes his weakness when he realizes that Wakanda won't survive in isolation. He then takes pride in Wakanda and shares its resources with the entire world. And so, in this way, his legacy becomes forever enmeshed in Wakanda's humanitarianism. Katniss Everdeen, however, is a slightly unconventional case in comparison to the classic definition of an epic hero. She is definitely not of noble birth, as there's hardly anything royal in a king's-like sense about being a coal miner's daughter from District 12. Nonetheless, there is something noble about her integrity and spirit. She's gritty to survive. Her love language is protection. Such noble characteristics of the average person like this would be valuable for an audience who is watching the film, or if you just so happen to have read the books. Unlike traditional heroes, too, her strengths in hunting, psychological control, and survival are not rooted in the supernatural, but they have been hard earned and are almost Herculean to have achieved, which makes them incredible, and seemingly superhuman. Nonetheless, we also know that such power eventually is bound to break down. Katniss does indeed have a pretty clear hamartia. Her flaw, in my opinion, is her self-isolation. Katniss's character is built upon her distrust of others and her reluctance to rely on anyone after years of trauma, loss, and singular breadwinning. Sure, in the first Hunger Games, she goes a long way because she sticks to herself, but when she allies herself with Peeta, it saves her life. She keeps herself alive too by not trusting the political movements around her, even in Mockingjay during Coin's rebellion. In the long term, when she opens herself methodically to trust, she is strong enough to take down totalitarianism for more than herself. Clearly, for us, the epic hero of this week's reading assignment is Gilgamesh. He is a king, so he's traditionally noble, and he possesses great physical strength and social power. Not to mention, he's a demigod, so he's been blessed with a divine air about him, too. However, the great mystery and fun of reading an epic poem is figuring out the hero's hamartia. So as you read, ponder what Gilgamesh's flaw or hamartia could be. What is his central strength that turns out to be the reason for his failure? How do we know that he starts to learn from his failure by the end? The next key term that I'd like to go over has to do more with the opening structure of every epic poem ever made. And it's something that filmmakers of huge blockbusters and screenwriters on indie movies still use today because it's so effective in the mode of storytelling. The Latin term in medias res translates to English as in the middle of things. Epic poems and stories will not start at the beginning. They'll open in the middle of the story, which instantly connects us to the rush so that we are hungry to catch up. To illustrate what it means for a story to begin in medias res or in the middle of things, take The Godfather Part 2, for example. It starts with Michael Corleone already established as the head of the Corleone family after the events of the previous film. The power shift from Vito to Michael has already happened, and we're entering a point where his reign is in full swing. In the opening scene, we see a lavish communion, like a celebration for Michael's son, Anthony, at the Corleone compound in Lake Tahoe. Guests are everywhere, politicians and mob associates are mingling, yet the FBI is taking pictures of license plates outside. This works as a story that begins in the middle of things because we are one, immediately immersed in the power dynamics of Michael as a calm, respected, but guarded leader. Second, the film foregoes any hand-holding exposition. We learn about the dynamics through actions and conversation about who's loyal, who's not, and what Michael's concerns are. The last and most important reason, number 3, why this works well as a story that begins in medias res is because of the foreshadowing and tension. Ultimately, that's why any story starts in medias res, the tension. Even in Celebration, there's an air of threat, which foreshadows the assassination attempt that will begin later that night. Michael Corleone is not an epic hero, rather a tragic one, but The Godfather Part 2 starts in the middle of things. While not exclusive to the epic poem, every epic poem will begin in medias res. Now that you know the storytelling convention, I promise you'll see it everywhere in almost every story that you'll consume. So as you review the beginning of the Epic of Gilgamesh in your supplementary materials for this week, break down how it begins in medias res in those 3 concepts. What are you immediately immersed in? Number 1. Number 2, what details are skipped? And number three, above all, what tension or foreshadowing does the opening establish? In the most classical sense, we will see two other conventions of epic poetry in the Epic of Gilgamesh and other epic poems that we'll read this semester. The first is the invocation of the muse. Very directly, the poet will invoke or request inspiration of some sort to tell the story. It's almost like strength, guide me through, because this is a huge undertaking for the poet, and they're going to do so from a god or a specific muse related to the poet's respective culture. This tradition, however, will not be present in the Epic of Gilgamesh because in ancient Mesopotamia, epic storytelling was connected to scribal culture. So the narrator presents himself as a learned authority already, or a witness to the hero's deeds, not as a vessel for divine inspiration. We will, however, see an invocation to the muse in the remaining epic poems this semester. Second, on this slide for your vocabulary, an epic simile is an extended comparison that adds grandeur to the storytelling in the epic poem. When we read about the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the poet will akin the storm to a battle. In kind, when we witness Gilgamesh's grief over the loss of his friend Enkidu, the poet will paint Gilgamesh as a predatory beast. Grand, extravagant, sensational, extreme. Those are the essences of an epic simile when we have that comparison. So as you read, see if you can locate any other epic similes or grand comparisons that use like or as. That ends our sweeping review of the terminology important to understanding and reading an epic poem in the abstract. Now we are going to shift more into the archetypal nature and structure of this ancient form of storytelling. These archetypes and conventions that we're about to go over are second nature to us today, but at one time they were cutting edge and revolutionary as to how we pass down what it means to be human. Later on in your task list for this week, you will watch and take notes on Joseph Campbell's monomyth of the hero's journey in more detail. Here, I'd like to offer a brief overview of the structural archetypes or universal patterns that appear repeatedly across stories, cultures, time periods, because it reflects fundamental human experiences and emotions, and we're addicted to it. We can't get enough of it. Joseph Campbell will use different language, but in general terms, a hero's journey follows these stages: the call to adventure, the companion appears, the hero's trials, loss and turning point, the quest for wisdom, and then a return and transformation. For illustrative purposes, but especially to clue you into the general rhythm of an epic story, I'll quickly walk through the structure of the Disney film, The Lion King. First is the call to adventure. Simba's call happens when Mufasa teaches him about the circle of life and his future role as a king. The adventure is set into motion when Scar manipulates Simba into going to the elephant graveyard, leading to the events that will shape his destiny and Miss Solomon's tears every time. Second, his companions appear. So Timon and Pumbaa become Simba's companions after he flees the Pride Lands. They give him shelter, friendship, and a new way of living, the Hakuna Matata, even if it's initially an avoidance from his responsibilities. The next step goes a little out of order, but that's generally true for many of the epic narratives that you could consume. Simba faces internal trials like his guilt over Mufasa's death and external ones. So he survives exile and he adapts to the jungle. Those are both strenuous and trials in nature. But later on, the trial intensifies when Nala finds him in the jungle and challenges him to return home, which forces him to confront his fears. Fourth, the epic hero Simba experiences loss and a turning point. The true turning point of this story is when Rafiki helps Simba realize Mufasa's spirit still lives within him, and Simba is not defined by Scar's lies. This marks the loss of his self-doubt and the rebirth of his identity as the rightful king of the Pride Land. Fifth is Simba's quest for wisdom, which comes from facing the truth. He must accept the past without being consumed by it and lead for the good of his people. All epic narratives will end with a return and transformation. So transformation is the key word here, though. Simba returns to Pride Rock, overthrows Scar, and restores balance. He has transformed from a guilt-ridden member of an exile into a confident leader who understands the responsibilities of kingship and the interconnectedness of life, of course. The reason why we can't go home again sometimes is not because our home is different. It's because we are different. And when we're luckiest, we're different in the best way possible. We, as a class, of course, won't read all of Gilgamesh's epic story, but we will read and experience the heart of a Mesopotamian flood narrative, which includes the aftermath of Gilgamesh's loss, his quest for wisdom, and his transformation. So we're going to get the back end of this hero's journey in our reading for this week. So as you read and reflect on what you read, ask yourself what he learns that we are all supposed to take away and apply to our own lives and perception. Now let's close out why epic poetry and this Gilgamesh case for the epic poem matters. Epic poetry is a genre that clues us to the foundations of how humans have told stories for thousands of years. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the earliest known surviving epic, and it contains many of the traits we still see in modern storytelling. The hero's journey, larger-than-life adventures, and most importantly, the universal messages about friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning. Oddly enough, too, Gilgamesh's story is one we have been retelling and struggling with since, and each of us must go through our own struggle to redefine our own legacies. It is quite literally the tale as old as civilization itself. From the ancient walls of Uruk to the stories you love today, the epic tradition begins here with the Epic of Gilgamesh. Thanks for listening and happy reading.